Hey everyone, welcome to Dr. Sleep. We love creating unique content for you, but we need your support now more than ever. Our channel is facing some challenges, and we really need your interaction. If you enjoy what we offer, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share our videos with your friends. Every comment, like, and share makes a huge difference. Let's grow together and keep bringing you the content you care about. Thank you for your continued support. You ever hear about the Holloway Library? Josh asked, scrolling through a Reddit thread on his laptop. Dave looked up from his notebook. Can't say I have. What's so special about it? Josh turned the screen toward him. The forum was filled with eerie stories, reports of books writing themselves, whispers in the dark, and people getting lost inside, never to return. The last librarian had vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. The final book they checked out? How to Escape the Library. Dave whistled. Creepy as hell, but it sounds like one of those internet urban legends. Josh grinned. Only one way to find out. It was how all their cases started. A mix of internet folklore, local legends, and a whole lot of blind curiosity. Their Beyond the Veil Investigations channel had built a solid following, but this was different. If they could capture books writing themselves on camera, it could be their biggest case yet. That night, they loaded up their gear, cameras, flashlights, EMF meters, and an old crowbar in case they needed to pry their way inside. The Holloway Library stood on the edge of town, abandoned but untouched. Its faded brick walls were covered in creeping ivy, and its tall arched windows stared down at them like unblinking eyes. A rusted chain hung across the doors, but the padlock had long since broken. Josh gave the door a nudge. It groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper. Moonlight trickled through the stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns on the wooden floors. Rows upon rows of bookshelves stretched into the darkness. The silence was absolute. They set up their cameras, placing one on the front desk and another near the aisles. Josh flicked on the EMF meter. No spikes, just the steady hum of stillness. So where's all the spooky stuff? Dave muttered. Then they heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, the rustling of pages. They froze. Josh swung his flashlight toward the shelves, but nothing moved. The books sat in neat, undisturbed rows. Draft? Dave offered. There's no wind in here, Josh whispered back. A single book lay open on a nearby table, pages shifting as if an invisible hand were flipping through them. The words were unreadable, written in looping ink that seemed to swirl like smoke. And then a whisper, soft, faint, coming from the bookshelves. Josh's grip on his flashlight tightened. Did you hear that? Dave nodded. His voice was barely above a breath. Yeah. The whispering grew louder, a mix of different voices muttering unintelligible words, and then one voice cut through the noise, a single sentence. Don't turn around. Josh's blood turned to ice. Don't turn around. His fingers locked around the flashlight, knuckles going white. Dave let out a shaky breath beside him. What did you say? Dave whispered. Josh shook his head. That wasn't me. The whispering continued, a low symphony of unintelligible murmurs. Some voices sounded desperate, others amused, like they knew something the two investigators didn't. Then another book spoke. He's behind you. Josh's breath caught in his throat. Dave swore under his breath. Neither of them turned around. The flashlight beam trembled in Josh's hands. Slowly, inch by inch, he angled it toward the table where the book lay open. The pages weren't blank anymore. Instead, there was a drawing. Josh and Dave standing exactly where they were now. Except in the picture, something loomed in the shadows behind them. A twisted shape, too tall, too thin. Josh's stomach lurched. He dared to glance at Dave. His friend's face was pale, eyes locked on the page. Josh, Dave breathed. Josh swallowed hard. Something wasn't right. He could feel it, a weight in the air like unseen eyes crawling over his skin. The door. They needed to leave. Josh reached for his camera, heart hammering. Let's get out of. A loud bang. Both of them jumped as the library door slammed shut. The echo rang through the aisles, sending dust plumes spiraling into the air. Josh sprinted for the entrance, grabbing the handle. He yanked. The door didn't budge. Locked, he hissed, panic creeping into his voice. Dave shined his light at the door's antique keyhole. We need a key. Josh's heart pounded. Where the hell are we supposed to find a key? A slow, creaking sound answered him. They spun around. The bookshelves were moving. Like pieces of a shifting maze, the towering rows of books slid silently across the floor. The library was changing. Dave exhaled sharply. Tell me you're seeing this. Josh could barely process what he was seeing. The shelves, which had been neatly arranged, now formed twisting corridors where there had been open space just moments ago. This wasn't here before, Dave muttered, looking at a newly formed path leading deeper into the library. Josh turned back to the front desk. Their camera was gone. Dave's flashlight flickered. Josh's stomach knotted. This place isn't just haunted. Dave nodded, voice hollow. It's alive. And then from the depths of the shifting aisles, the whispering returned. Only this time the voices were clearer, more excited. And they were all saying the same thing. Keep reading. Josh's pulse thundered in his ears. The bookshelves had moved again, subtly but unmistakably. What had been a clear exit route moments ago was now a narrow corridor leading deeper into the library's darkened interior. Dave swept his flashlight across the aisles. The books sat perfectly still, but somehow Josh felt watched. We need to go, Josh whispered. Dave didn't argue. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a roll of bright orange electrical tape. Trail markers, he said, voice tight. If this place is shifting, we need to keep track of where we've been. He tore off a piece and stuck it to the nearest bookshelf. The adhesive clung stubbornly to the wood. Okay, let's retrace our steps. They turned back toward where they had entered. The orange tape was gone. Not peeled off, not on the floor, just gone. Josh's throat dried. That's impossible. Dave's flashlight flickered again. He smacked it with his palm. Cheap batteries. Josh wasn't so sure. They walked cautiously, trying to mentally map the layout. But every turn led them deeper into a labyrinth of endless shelves, books, and shifting pathways. And then Josh stopped. His flashlight beam caught something ahead of them, sitting neatly on a shelf, right in the center of their path. Josh's flashlight, the one he had left as a marker, switched off. His fingers clenched around the one in his hand. Dave. Dave followed his gaze, his own face draining of color. That's not possible, he whispered. Josh's gut twisted. Something was toying with them. The whispering started again. At first it was the same scattered murmurs, incomprehensible and distant. But then one clear voice rang through the aisles. You've been here before. Josh whirled around, scanning the shelves. Nothing. Another book fell from the shelf beside them, landing open on the floor. Dave swallowed hard. Don't read it. Josh couldn't help himself. His light shone on the open page. The words weren't printed. They were appearing, letter by letter, as if being written by an invisible hand. And they were writing about them. Josh reached down and picked up the book, not realizing the mistake he'd just made. Josh's hand froze inches from the page. The sentence wasn't finished, but then, before his eyes, the next words appeared. He turned to Dave and whispered, "Let's go." But they didn't see the figure waiting in the next aisle. Josh dropped the book. Dave stared at him. "Josh, what did it say?" Josh's voice was hoarse. "It said we're not alone." From the next aisle over, something moved. A slow, deliberate shuffling echoed from the next aisle. Josh and Dave stood frozen, ears straining. Something wasn't right about the sound. The rhythm was off. Not footsteps exactly. More like the sound of something dragging. Dave grabbed Josh's sleeve. "We need to move. Now." They took a few cautious steps backward. The whispers returned, more insistent now, threading through the aisles like fingers brushing the back of their necks. Josh's flashlight beam landed on a heavy wooden desk. An old ledger sat open on top, its pages yellowed with age. Look at this, Josh murmured, his fear momentarily replaced by curiosity. Dave hesitated, then joined him. The ledger contained names, hundreds of them, handwritten in ink that had long since faded. What is this? A sign-in book? Dave asked. Josh ran a finger down the last few entries. The most recent one made his stomach drop. Josh and Dave. His own name, his best friend's name, written in perfect script. Josh hadn't signed anything. A chill crept up his spine. Dave, did you? Dave's face had gone pale. His hand shook as he pointed to the name beneath theirs, or rather the lack of one. Instead of a signature, the space below theirs was occupied by a black smudge. A smear of ink so dark it looked like a hole punched through reality itself. The dragging sound was closer now. Josh snapped the ledger shut. We're leaving. They turned, and the bookshelves had moved again. The open aisle they had walked through seconds ago was gone. In its place stood a towering wall of books. Dave let out a shaky breath. We're trapped. Josh clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. There had to be a way out. And then his eyes landed on the last full entry in the ledger. The name, Eleanor Holloway, the last librarian, the book she had checked out. How to Escape the Library. Josh grabbed Dave's arm. We need to find that book. The whispering turned into a chorus of laughter. Dave's grip on his flashlight tightened. You think that'll help? Josh nodded. It has to. They raced through the shifting aisles, breath ragged, scanning every shelf. Then Josh spotted it, a small, unassuming book. The spine read, How to Escape the Library. Josh grabbed it and flipped it open. The pages were missing, every single one. The whispering turned to mocking, hungry voices. Then the final chilling sentence scrawled itself across the blank page in fresh, inky script. You're already part of the story. The dragging footsteps stopped. Something exhaled, right behind them. The breath on the back of Josh's neck was wet and ragged, like something breathing through decayed lungs. He didn't turn around, didn't dare. Dave grabbed his wrist and yanked. Move! They tore down the aisle, their footsteps pounding against the wooden floor. The shelves shifted around them, the space between them closing like jaws. Josh's flashlight flickered. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. They weren't alone in here. They stumbled into an open section, a long hallway lined with bookshelves. But something was wrong. Every book in this section was blank. No titles, no authors, just empty covers. Josh hesitated. What the hell is this? Dave ran a shaking hand along the spines. They feel old. Josh pulled one from the shelf and flipped it open. The pages weren't blank. They were filled with words, and the first sentence made his stomach drop. The first time Beyond the Veil investigations encountered the supernatural, it was an abandoned mansion with infinite rooms. Josh and Dave never expected what waited for them inside. Josh felt his throat tighten. This is us. It was their first investigation. Every detail was there, the flickering lights, the cold spots, the video footage that had gone missing. Dave pulled another book down, opening it. His eyes widened. This is about our next case. Josh stepped closer. What? Dave's flashlight trembled over the page. I was researching an asylum case for next month. We haven't even gone yet, but it's all here. Josh's stomach twisted. He pulled another book, flipping through the pages. His hands went ice cold. The book was describing this moment, right now. Josh scanned ahead, his fingers shook. Josh turned the page and felt his stomach drop, because in this version only one of them makes it out. His breath caught in his throat. Dave must have read the same line because he snapped the book shut. Nope, we're not doing this. Josh shoved the book back onto the shelf, heart hammering. Another book sat on the center table. This one wasn't finished. The words were still appearing letter by letter. They leaned over to read it. Josh and Dave turned around and saw the figure standing at the end of the aisle. It smiled, showing far too many teeth. Josh's blood turned to ice. Dave's breath hitched. Tell me you made that up. Josh slowly lifted his flashlight, shining it down the aisle. And there it was. A tall, gaunt figure stood in the shadows. Its smile was too wide. Its eyes were sunken pits of ink, and as it took a slow, dragging step forward, the books whispered in unison, "Keep reading." Josh's hand clenched around his flashlight, but his fingers felt numb. The thing at the end of the aisle wasn't human. Its grin stretched too wide, as if its skin had been stitched too tightly over its skull. Its eyes were nothing but pools of ink, black, reflective, hungry. And it was moving toward them, slowly, deliberately. Josh's breath came in ragged gasps. He grabbed Dave's arm, pulling him backward. "We need to go now." Dave didn't argue. They turned and sprinted down the aisle, the shifting bookshelves closing in around them, warping the path. Somewhere behind them, the thing whispered, "Don't run. It only makes the story better." Josh ignored it. They stumbled into another open area, a reading nook with old wooden chairs and a dust-covered table. Books lay scattered on the surface, their pages still moving, still writing. Josh's eyes caught on one book in particular. The ink was fresh. It was writing as they stood there. He forced himself to read. Josh and Dave ran, but they didn't realize they'd just cornered themselves. Josh looked down and saw the book, and his stomach dropped when he read the next sentence. Josh's stomach dropped. His hands trembled. His gaze flicked down to the next line. The figure reached the doorway, blocking the only exit. A shadow fell over them. Josh's entire body went cold. Dave turned and froze. The figure was standing in the doorway. It hadn't walked, hadn't run. It had just appeared. It grinned. Josh shoved the table into its path. The books scattered across the floor. Some of them landed open. And then they started flipping through their pages, fast, like 100 invisible hands were searching for something. Josh's eyes darted to the nearest open book, just in time to see a new sentence write itself. Josh made a mistake. He knocked over the wrong book. The entire library shuddered. The bookshelves groaned. A sudden gust of wind shot through the room, howling between the aisles. The thing in the doorway stopped grinning. Josh looked down at the book he had knocked over. The title was handwritten in thick, smudged ink. The Librarian's Secret. Dave's voice was barely a whisper. "You think that means what I think it does?" Josh licked his lips, his mouth dry. Behind them, the figure hissed. Josh grabbed the book. "I think it's the only way we get out of here." The pages began flipping on their own, and then they stopped. A single sentence stared back at them. "The key is with him." Josh's blood ran cold, because he already knew who him was, the librarian, and he was standing right in front of them. Josh's breath came in shallow gasps. The thing standing in the doorway wasn't just a ghost or an entity, it was the librarian, or whatever was left of him. The air felt thick, pressing against Josh's skin like static electricity. The librarian didn't blink, didn't breathe. He only stared with those black, ink pit eyes, his mouth stretched into that awful, unnatural grin. Dave whispered, "Josh, the book said the key is with him." Josh's grip on the book tightened. His gaze flicked downward to the withered, rotting belt hanging around the librarian's waist. And there it was, an old iron key, dangling. Dave saw it too. He swallowed hard. How the hell are we supposed to get that? The librarian's head tilted sharply, too fast to be human. Then the lights in the library went out. The darkness was absolute. Josh's heart slammed against his ribs. His flashlight flickered, brief flashes of light catching shifting movement. The whispering returned. More voices now, dozens, maybe hundreds, circling, laughing. "Keep reading." Josh clenched his teeth. No more reading. Action. He reached into his pocket, fingers fumbling for the lighter he always carried. He didn't smoke, but after enough beyond the veil cases, he'd learned that fire was a useful thing to have. He flicked it on. A small flickering flame illuminated the space just enough. And the librarian was right in front of him. Josh didn't think, didn't hesitate. With one desperate motion, he lunged. His fingers closed around the cold, rusted key, yanking it free from the librarian's belt. The reaction was instantaneous. The whispering became screams. The bookshelves shook violently, pages flying loose as if the library itself was coming apart. The librarian lurched forward, mouth stretching impossibly wide. Dave grabbed Josh's arm. "Run!" They bolted. Behind them, the librarian's shriek rose, high and inhuman. The shelves collapsed inward, books exploding into ink. Josh's mind was focused on one thing: the door. He clutched the iron key so tightly it dug into his palm. The entrance loomed ahead, but the shelves were shifting again, trying to trap them. Dave dove forward, knocking books aside, clearing a path. Josh rammed the key into the lock, twisted it. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the door swung open. Cold, real night air rushed in. They stumbled out. Josh and Dave collapsed onto the pavement, gasping, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. Behind them, the library shuddered. The whispering grew distant. And then, the flames started. The first flickers of orange flame licked up the bookshelves inside. Josh and Dave scrambled to their feet, staring in stunned silence as fire erupted from within the Holloway library. The books burned first. Pages curled, blackened, screaming as ink bled and twisted, turning into smoke. The flames spread fast, too fast, like the fire wasn't just consuming wood and paper, like it was consuming something else. Josh stepped back. His lungs heaved, heart still racing. Dave was still bent over, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Holy shit. Josh turned back toward the building, watching as the inferno devoured it. The whispering voices didn't stop. They rose, screaming, not in pain, not in fear, but in rage. The Holloway library didn't want to die. The windows burst outward, glass shattering across the street. Ink dripped down the walls, bubbling as if it was bleeding from the building itself. Then, from within the flames, a figure emerged. The librarian. His gaunt form stood motionless in the fire, his ink-black eyes locked on Josh. He wasn't burning. He should have been, but he wasn't. Instead, the shadows around him shifted, writhing. The fire couldn't kill him, but it could destroy his prison. Josh felt something ice-cold settle into his bones. This wasn't a victory. This was a release. The flames roared higher, consuming the structure entirely. The librarian lifted a single bony finger, pointed, right at Josh. Then he stepped backward and vanished into the collapsing building. The Holloway library caved in on itself, a final breath of smoke and fire rising into the night sky. Then, silence. Only the crackling of embers remained. Josh and Dave stood there, still panting, still shaking. The library was gone. Gone. For the first time since stepping inside, Josh let himself believe it. "It's over," he whispered. Dave let out a breathy, disbelieving laugh. Yeah, man, it's over." They turned, didn't look back, didn't say another word. Just got in the car, slammed the doors, and peeled out of there, leaving nothing but a burning ruin behind them. As they drove, Dave nervously laughed again. "We got some insane footage, man. This'll be our biggest case yet." Josh nodded, forced a smile, but deep down a sour feeling twisted in his stomach. Something felt wrong. Something wasn't finished, but he didn't say anything, didn't want to give life to the thought gnawing at the back of his mind. They were safe. It was over. It had to be. But Josh didn't know, not yet, that the library wasn't gone. Not really. And that the story wasn't over. Not yet. The drive home was silent. The library was gone, burned to the ground. They had escaped. So why did Josh feel like something was watching him? He tried to shake it off. It was just adrenaline, just the aftershocks of what they'd been through. The footage, if it had actually captured what they saw, would be the biggest thing they'd ever posted. But when they got home and reviewed the footage, there was nothing. Every clip that should have shown books writing themselves was just static. Every moment where the shelves moved on their own, gone. Every single instance of the librarian appearing, vanished. Josh and Dave just stared at the screen. "What the hell?" Dave whispered. Josh scrubbed through the footage again. His fingers were shaking. They had seen it all, felt it. It had happened, hadn't it? The final clip showed them running out of the library, the fire erupting, the building collapsing. That at least was real. But the books, the maze, the whispers, they might as well have never existed. Dave rubbed his face. Man, I don't know what to think. Josh swallowed hard. It doesn't matter. We know what happened, and we got out. Dave nodded, but his face still looked uneasy. They both agreed. They wouldn't talk about the missing footage. They'd cut together what little they had and move on. Josh tried to sleep that night, tried to forget. But then, a soft sound slid across his bedroom floor. Something small, something heavy. Josh's stomach turned to stone. He didn't want to look, didn't want to see. But his eyes drifted downward, and there, sitting just inside his bedroom, was a book. It hadn't been there before. He hadn't brought it home. His breath hitched. The title, printed in dark, familiar ink, sent a cold blade of terror through his chest. Volume 2. Josh snapped upright. His heart pounded. No. He grabbed his phone, fingers shaking, and dialed Dave. It rang and rang. No answer. Then his TV flickered on. Josh's blood turned to ice. It wasn't a show. It wasn't static. It was footage. A first-person perspective. Someone walking through a library, turning a corner, stopping at a bookshelf. A hand reached out, fingers trailing along the spines. Then it grabbed a book. Josh's chest tightened. The title was crystal clear. The Last Investigation of Josh and Dave. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys exploring the weirder corners of the internet. Not the illegal stuff, just the strange and unusual. Forums where people share obscure conspiracy theories, deep dives into weird cryptids, or long discussions about haunted locations. It's mostly just harmless fun, and it keeps me entertained on boring nights. But one night, I stumbled onto something I probably should have stayed far, far away from. I found a thread in one of those less traveled forums talking about the hidden truths that are supposedly buried deep within the dark web. Most of it was nonsense, people claiming they found evidence of time travel or that they'd seen the face of God. But one post caught my eye. It was different from the others, not sensational or over the top. The user, who went by the name Alter13, simply mentioned that they had real knowledge about an ancient cult that's still active today. Something about the tone made it feel genuine. I don't know what possessed me, but I was curious enough to message them. I figured they'd just send me a link to some bogus website or try to sell me a fake occult book. But instead, the conversation that followed felt eerily authentic. Alter13 didn't try to convince me of anything right away. They just started by talking about general philosophy, how people seek meaning in chaos, how the world is more interconnected than we realize, how fear is a tool to understand oneself. It was deep and unsettling, but not in a supernatural way. More like they understood how to reach into the darkest parts of your mind and pull something out you didn't know was there. We chatted on and off for weeks. I don't know why I kept going back. Something about the way they spoke. It was addictive. It felt like they knew more about me than I knew about myself, like they were peeling away layers of my mind, exposing vulnerabilities I didn't even know I had. At the same time, they were strangely friendly. They never pushed me to believe anything or do anything. It was more like they were guiding me toward something, gently nudging me down a path. Then, one night, the conversation shifted. Alter13 said they trusted me and that they wanted to share something more, tangible. They asked for my address. I should have known better. I really should have. But I gave it to them. It wasn't like me at all. I'm usually paranoid about that kind of thing, but I was so wrapped up in the mystery of it all that I just did it. They said they were going to send me something that would make everything they talked about more real. A few days passed, and I almost forgot about it. Almost. Then the package arrived. It was a small box, no bigger than a shoebox, and it had no return address. The cardboard was old and worn, like it had been sitting somewhere damp for a while. My name was written on it in what looked like red ink, but it had that rusty color that made me think it wasn't ink at all. I felt a chill run down my spine when I picked it up, but I told myself it was just my imagination. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. I stared at the box for a long time, debating whether I should open it, but curiosity got the better of me. It always does. I grabbed a knife and carefully cut through the tape. The flaps of the box opened slowly, revealing something wrapped in dark cloth. The cloth was rough, like burlap, and had an earthy smell that made me think of damp soil and decaying leaves. I unwrapped it, hands trembling slightly. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden box. It was beautiful in a strange way, with patterns that seemed to swirl and twist the longer I looked at them. The wood was dark, almost black, and felt cold to the touch. There was a lock on it, an old-fashioned one, and tied to the box with a thin piece of twine was a tiny, ornate key. My heart was racing, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was inside. I untied the key and slid it into the lock. It clicked open with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet of my kitchen. Slowly, I lifted the lid. At first, I thought the box was empty. But then I noticed something at the bottom, something small and almost insignificant. It was a piece of paper folded neatly. I picked it up and unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and had that same rusty red writing on it. But this time, the words were different. "You have been chosen." That's all it said. 4 simple words that sent a wave of cold fear through me. Chosen for what? By whom? I didn't know what to think, and I didn't have time to figure it out because, at that moment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Do you like the box?" I dropped the paper, my heart pounding. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Before I could process anything, another message came through. "Open the box again." I hesitated. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to throw the box away, to get as far from it as possible. But something else, something darker, urged me to follow the instructions. Against my better judgment, I reached for the box again and lifted the lid. This time, there was something else inside. I know it wasn't there before, I was sure of it. But now, resting at the bottom of the box, was a small silver pendant. It was shaped like a serpent, coiled around itself, with tiny ruby-red eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't help myself. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and a shock ran through me, like a static charge, but stronger, deeper. Another message. "Wear it." I don't know why I did it. I don't know what compelled me to put that pendant around my neck. But the moment I did, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me, like everything was going to be okay, like I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. But deep down, I knew I had just crossed a line, one I couldn't come back from. Wearing the pendant was like flipping a switch inside me. At first, nothing seemed different. I went about my day as usual, convincing myself that I was overreacting. Maybe I'd just let my imagination get the better of me. But as the hours passed, I started noticing changes. Small, subtle things that made me feel like I was losing control over my own mind. It started with my thoughts. They felt clouded. I'd be thinking about something mundane, like what to make for dinner, and then suddenly I'd be bombarded with images of the serpent pendant or flashes of that strange box sitting on my kitchen table. It was distracting, but more than that, it was unsettling. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. It was like the pendant was creeping into every corner of my mind, even when I wasn't wearing it. And then there were the dreams. The first night I wore the pendant to bed, I had the most vivid, unsettling dream I've ever experienced. I was standing in a dark room, empty except for a single candle burning in the center. The flame flickered weakly, barely casting enough light to see, but I could make out shadows moving along the walls, long, twisted shapes that seemed to writhe and squirm like they were alive. In the dream, I felt compelled to walk toward the candle, but the closer I got, the more distorted the shadows became. They started to take on forms, shapes that were almost human but not quite. Their eyes, if you could call them that, were glowing like the eyes of the serpent on the pendant. I could feel them watching me, judging me. Just as I reached out to extinguish the candle, one of the shadows lunged at me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The pendant felt heavy around my neck, almost like it was tightening its grip on me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day I tried to take the pendant off, but no matter how much I tugged at the chain, it wouldn't budge. It was like it had fused to my skin. Panic started to set in. I thought about cutting the chain, but something told me that wouldn't work either. I was stuck with it, whether I liked it or not. As the days went on, I started noticing changes in my behavior too. I became more irritable, snapping at people over the smallest things. I avoided my friends and family, not wanting to explain why I was acting so strange. I felt like I was being pulled in two directions. Part of me wanted to get rid of the pendant and forget all about Altar 13. But another part wanted to dig deeper, to find out what this all meant. One afternoon, as I was scrolling through my phone, I received another message from that unknown number. "You're beginning to understand, aren't you?" I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't even know what I was supposed to be understanding. But before I could type anything, another message appeared. "There's more to learn. The box holds secrets. You need to look deeper." I didn't want to. I didn't want to go near that box again. But the pull was too strong. It was like the pendant was whispering in my ear, urging me to obey. Against every ounce of common sense I had left, I found myself walking back to the kitchen, where the box was still sitting on the table, untouched since the night it arrived. I opened it again, half expecting something new to appear inside. But there was nothing. Just the same dark, empty interior. I felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe this was all in my head. Maybe I was just overthinking everything. But then I noticed something. The bottom of the box wasn't as solid as it seemed. There was a faint outline, like a hidden compartment. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over it. I didn't know if I wanted to see what was inside, but at this point, I felt like I didn't have a choice. The pendant seemed to hum with anticipation, like it was guiding me. With a deep breath, I pressed down on the bottom of the box. It gave way easily, revealing a hidden compartment underneath. Inside was a small rolled-up piece of parchment, sealed with what looked like wax. The seal was imprinted with the same serpent symbol as the pendant. I carefully broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The writing was in that same rusty red ink, and it was a language I didn't recognize, ancient, almost runic in its appearance. But somehow I could understand it perfectly. The words seemed to translate themselves in my mind as I read them. It was a message, a warning, or maybe a prophecy. It spoke of a chosen one who would lead the cult into a new era, someone who had been marked by the serpent's gaze. The words were vague, but they left no doubt in my mind that they were talking about me. And then at the bottom of the parchment was a single line of text in plain English. "You must prepare for the ritual." Ritual? What ritual? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was getting too real, too fast. I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted to explore the dark web, maybe learn something new, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. My phone buzzed again. "Do not be afraid. Embrace your destiny." I dropped the phone, backing away from the box as if it had bitten me. This wasn't some harmless internet mystery anymore. This was something darker, something that had its claws in me, and I didn't know how to get free. But deep down, a part of me wasn't sure if I even wanted to. The following days were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I never saw anyone around. The pendant felt heavier each time I wore it, like it was dragging me down, pulling me into something I didn't understand. My thoughts grew darker, more twisted, and sleep became a distant memory. The dreams, no, the nightmares, became more intense, more vivid. Each time the shadows grew closer, and the serpent's eyes glowed brighter. One night, I found myself sitting at my computer, staring at the blank screen. I don't even remember getting there. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I knew what I had to do, even if I didn't want to admit it. I had to reach out to Alter 13 again. I needed answers, even if I was terrified of what they might be. I logged into the same dark web forum where I'd first encountered them. The thread was still there, just as I'd left it. I sent a message, my heart pounding as I typed. I found the hidden compartment. What is the ritual? It didn't take long for a reply to come through. You are ready. The words made my stomach churn. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to be ready. But I didn't have time to dwell on it because another message quickly followed. The ritual is a test of your will, your courage, and your devotion. It is the final step in your initiation. Initiation? That word sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just some abstract game or a harmless online mystery. This was real, and I was in far deeper than I ever intended to go. I wanted to back out, to forget everything and pretend this never happened, but I couldn't. The pendant seemed to tighten around my neck, reminding me that there was no turning back. I forced myself to respond. What do I have to do? There was a long pause, long enough for me to start second-guessing everything, but finally the reply came. There is a place you must go, a place where the veil between our world and the other is thin. There you will complete the ritual. My heart raced as I read the next part of the message. They gave me an address, a location deep in the woods, miles from any town or civilization. It was a place I'd never heard of, and a quick search online brought up nothing. It was like it didn't exist, except in whatever twisted reality Alter 13 lived in. The instructions were clear. I was to go there, alone, at midnight. There would be signs, things I was supposed to look for, things I would understand once I arrived. And then when the time was right, I would embrace my destiny. The thought of actually going to that place made my blood run cold, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I was too deep in, and something inside me, a dark curiosity perhaps, pushed me to see this through. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't go, something far worse would happen. Maybe it was the pendant's influence, or maybe it was just my mind unraveling, but I felt compelled to follow through. The day of the ritual, I could hardly function. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and anticipation. I packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, some water, a pocket knife. Things that made me feel slightly less vulnerable, though I doubted they'd be of any real use. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't even leave a note. It was as if some part of me knew that this was something I had to do alone. As night fell, I drove out to the location Alter 13 had given me. The road was rough and overgrown, clearly not used often, and the deeper I went, the more isolated I felt. By the time I reached the end of the road, I was completely surrounded by dense forest. The trees loomed over me like silent sentinels, their branches casting long, twisted shadows in the moonlight. I parked the car and hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me. But the pendant, now ice cold against my skin, urged me forward. I grabbed my bag and stepped out of the car, the sound of the door closing echoing through the still night air. The woods were eerily quiet, not even a whisper of wind rustling the leaves. I switched on my flashlight and began walking, following the faint trail that led deeper into the forest. The path was narrow and winding, and every so often I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement, a shadow that didn't belong. But each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. After what felt like hours of walking, I came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, ancient and weathered, covered in strange symbols that matched the ones I'd seen on the parchment. The air around the altar felt heavy, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. This was it. This was where the ritual would take place. I approached the altar, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. There was a small, shallow bowl carved into the stone, and beside it a knife, old and rusted with a handle wrapped in what looked like leather. I didn't need anyone to tell me what it was for. The instructions were clear in my mind, like a script I'd memorized. I was to cut my hand, let the blood fill the bowl, and recite the words that had been written on the parchment. It was a simple ritual, but the implications were anything but. I knew that once I completed it, there would be no going back. Whatever door I was opening, it would stay open. My hands trembled as I picked up the knife. The blade was dull, but it would do the job. I held it over my palm, hesitating, the weight of the decision crushing me. But then, just as I was about to make the cut, I heard something, a rustling in the trees behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The sound grew closer, and then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a man, or at least, it looked like a man. He was tall and thin, with long, unkempt hair and eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. He was dressed in dark, tattered robes, and as he stepped into the clearing, I realized with a jolt of terror that I recognized him. It was Altar 13. He smiled at me, a slow, twisted smile that sent chills down my spine. He didn't say a word, just watched me with those unnerving eyes. I felt paralyzed, unable to move or speak, as if his gaze had locked me in place. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground. He took a step forward, and then another, until he was standing right in front of me. I could feel the cold radiating off him, like he was a part of the darkness itself. He reached out, and I flinched, but he didn't touch me. Instead, he gestured to the altar. "The time has come," he said, his voice low and almost hypnotic. "You must complete the ritual." I shook my head, fear overwhelming me. I don't want to." But he just smiled that same chilling smile. "You've already begun. There's no turning back now." I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there frozen in terror. But the pendant pulsed against my chest, a cold reminder of the path I'd chosen. I knew he was right. I couldn't stop now, no matter how much I wanted to. Whatever was going to happen, I had to see it through. With trembling hands, I picked up the knife again. Altar 13 stepped back, watching me with those piercing eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and then pressed the blade to my palm. The pain was sharp, but not unbearable. I watched as the blood pooled in my hand and then dripped into the bowl. The words came to me unbidden, flowing from my lips in a language I didn't know but somehow understood perfectly. The air around me seemed to hum with energy, and the symbols on the altar began to glow with a faint, eerie light. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from somewhere far away. As the last word left my mouth, the light flared, blinding me for a moment. When it faded, everything was silent. The bowl was full, the blood swirling in strange, hypnotic patterns. I stared at it, feeling a sense of dread settle over me. What had I done? What was I unleashing? Before I could even begin to comprehend what was happening, Altar 13 stepped forward and placed his hand on the bowl. The blood rippled, and then, impossibly, it began to drain away, as if being absorbed into the stone. The symbols on the altar flared again, brighter this time, and the ground beneath us trembled. Altar 13 looked at me, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "It is done," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You are one of us now." And just like that, the world around me seemed to shift. The forest, the altar, Altar 13, all of it began to fade, dissolving into darkness. I felt a rush of cold air, and then nothingness. For a moment I was suspended in a void, unable to see or hear anything, just floating in an endless abyss. Panic gripped me, but before I could even comprehend what was happening, I felt a jolt, a sudden sharp pull that yanked me back to reality. I gasped for air, my eyes snapping open, and found myself lying on the ground in the same clearing where the ritual had taken place. The stone altar was gone, replaced by a ring of burned grass, and the symbols that had glowed so brightly were now nothing more than faint impressions in the earth. The night was silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Altar 13 was gone. There was no sign of him or the others, as if they had never been there at all. For a brief moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if the ritual had been some sort of twisted hallucination. But the pendant, still warm against my chest, told me otherwise. Whatever had happened, it was real, and I was left alone to deal with the aftermath. I stumbled to my feet, feeling weak and disoriented, and made my way back through the forest. The path seemed longer now, the trees taller and more imposing, as if the very landscape had changed in the wake of the ritual. My mind was a mess, a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but one thought stood out among the rest. I needed to get home. By the time I reached my car, the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the trees. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I took one last look at the forest, half expecting to see Altar 13 or one of the others watching me from the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the silent trees, standing as they always had. I drove home in a daze, my thoughts racing, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something deep within me that I couldn't fully understand. The pendant, once a simple object, now felt like a part of me, something that had fused with my very soul. As I pulled into my driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else, something darker. The scar on my hand throbbed, a constant reminder of the ritual, and I knew then that there was no going back to the life I had before. Whatever had been awakened within me, whatever bond had been forged that night, it was just the beginning, and deep down I knew that the true nightmare was only just starting. I woke up in my bed drenched in sweat, with the pendant still around my neck. For a moment I thought it had all been a nightmare, that maybe I had finally cracked under the pressure of everything that had happened. But the sharp pain in my hand told me otherwise. I glanced down to see a faint scar where I had cut myself the night before, a physical reminder that what I had experienced was all too real. I tried to piece together what had happened, but my memories were fragmented, like a dream slipping away the more I tried to grasp it. I remembered the ritual, the blood, the glowing symbols, and Altar 13's unsettling presence. But what had happened after? How had I ended up back in my bed? I got up, feeling a strange sense of detachment, like I was moving through a fog. My head ached, and every sound seemed muffled, distant. I stumbled into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, hoping to clear my mind. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. My skin was pale, almost sickly, and my eyes were sunken with dark circles beneath them. The pendant, still cool against my chest, seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic energy, like it was alive. I tried to take it off again, but the chain refused to budge, almost as if it had become a part of me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing control, like something was inside me, twisting my thoughts and emotions. The fear that had been gnawing at me since the box first arrived was now a constant presence, a shadow that followed me everywhere. I wanted to reach out for help, to tell someone, anyone, what was happening, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come, and every time I tried to pick up the phone, I was overwhelmed by a sense of dread that left me paralyzed, Days passed in a blur, and I found myself avoiding the outside world more and more. I kept the curtains drawn, the doors locked, and the lights dimmed. The only company I had was the pendant, its cold, unyielding presence a constant reminder of the ritual I had performed. The scar on my hand itched constantly, and I caught myself scratching at it until it bled. Then the messages started again. At first, they were just vague, unsettling phrases from the same unknown number. The time is coming. Prepare yourself. You cannot escape. Each one sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to ignore them, hoping they would stop. But they didn't. They became more frequent, more urgent, until my phone was buzzing with notifications day and night. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront Altar 13 directly, to demand answers, or at the very least, some explanation for what was happening to me. I logged back into the dark web forum, my hands trembling as I typed out my message. What have you done to me? What is this pendant? I need to know the truth. This time the response came almost instantly. You are awakening. The ritual was only the beginning. You have been chosen to lead, to guide us into the new era. Embrace it, and you will find power beyond your imagination. Power. I didn't want power. I wanted my life back. I wanted to be free of this nightmare. I told him as much, but his reply was cold, final. There is no going back. The bond is sealed. You belong to us now. Panic welled up inside me, but before I could respond, another message appeared, this one more chilling than all the others. The others will come for you soon. Be ready. The others? Who were they? What did they want from me? I felt trapped, like a mouse caught in a maze with no way out. The walls were closing in, and no matter how hard I tried to find an escape, I kept hitting dead ends. That night, the dreams returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. I was back in the clearing, standing before the stone altar, but this time, I wasn't alone. Shadows surrounded me, their twisted forms flickering in and out of existence like they were made of smoke. They whispered to me in a language I couldn't understand, their voices a low, haunting chant that echoed in my mind. The pendant glowed brightly, its light illuminating the darkness around me. The shadows recoiled from it, hissing like wounded animals. But instead of feeling relief, I felt a deep, gnawing hunger. A need to know, to understand what this power was and how to control it. As the dream continued, I found myself walking toward the altar again, drawn by an invisible force. This time there was something different about it. The symbols that had glowed during the ritual were now etched into the stone, pulsating with a rhythmic energy that matched the pendants. And in the center of the altar was the bowl, still stained with my blood, but now filled with a dark, swirling liquid that seemed to absorb the light around it. I reached out, my hand trembling, and dipped my fingers into the liquid. It was cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt, and as soon as I touched it, the shadows surged forward, wrapping around me like tendrils of smoke. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, as they pulled me closer to the altar, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. You are one of us. Embrace your destiny. The shadows pressed in, suffocating me, until I could feel my consciousness slipping away. Just as I was about to succumb to the darkness, I woke up, gasping for air, the taste of cold metal lingering in my mouth. I knew then that there was no escaping this. Whatever I had become a part of, whatever dark force had claimed me, it wasn't going to let me go. The only thing I could do was prepare for whatever was coming and hope that I could survive it. As I sat in the darkness of my room, the pendant glowing faintly against my chest, I realized that this was only the beginning. The real nightmare was just beginning. The days following that dream were a waking nightmare. I was constantly on edge, feeling as if eyes were on me at every moment. My paranoia grew, but it wasn't baseless. There were signs that something or someone was watching me. I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, hear faint footsteps outside my door late at night, and find things in my home slightly out of place. The worst part was the silence, the absence of any human contact, the isolation I had unwittingly placed myself in. The messages kept coming, more frequent and urgent now. "Prepare for the ritual," they would say. "The time is almost here." I didn't know what the ritual was, but I had a sinking feeling that it was far worse than the one I had already performed. The pendant, which had once only felt cold, now seemed to burn against my skin, a constant reminder of the bond I had unwittingly forged. Then one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I received a message that made my blood run cold. "They are here." I barely had time to process the words before I heard it. A knock at the door. It wasn't loud or forceful, just a soft, deliberate knock that echoed through the silence of my apartment. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn and run. But where could I go? There was no escape. The knocking persisted, slow and rhythmic, as if whoever was on the other side knew exactly what kind of fear they were instilling in me. I hesitated for a long moment. Then finally, with shaking hands, I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. What I saw on the other side made my heart drop. Standing in the hallway were 3 figures, all dressed in the same dark, tattered robes that I had seen in my dreams. Their faces were hidden beneath deep hoods, but I could feel their eyes on me, cold and unyielding. The tallest of the 3, who I assumed was their leader, took a step forward and raised a hand, palm up, as if in offering. In his hand was another pendant, identical to the one I wore. "Come with us," he said, his voice low and commanding. "It is time." I wanted to refuse, to slam the door and lock myself inside, but the words caught in my throat. I was powerless to resist. The pendant around my neck pulsed with a strange energy, almost as if it was urging me to follow. And despite every fiber of my being screaming at me to stay, I found myself stepping out into the hallway, my movements slow and deliberate. They led me down the stairs and out into the cold night. The streets were empty, the world around us silent as we walked. I felt like I was in a trance, my mind disconnected from my body, unable to think or act of my own free will. The leader of the group walked just ahead of me, and every so often he would glance back, his eyes, those glowing, unnatural eyes, locking with mine. We walked for what felt like hours, though in reality, it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. They led me to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, a place I had never seen before. It was old and crumbling, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. But as we approached, I noticed something strange. The building seemed to hum with energy, the same energy that radiated from the pendant. The leader pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and we stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and the only light came from the faint glow of the pendants. They guided me through a maze of dark corridors until we reached a large open room at the center of the building. In the middle of the room was a stone altar, identical to the one I had seen in the clearing, but larger and more imposing. The symbols on the altar glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The other 2 figures moved to stand on either side of the altar, their heads bowed in silence. The leader turned to face me, holding out the second pendant. "You have been chosen," he said, his voice reverberating in the empty space. "This is your final test. Accept your role, and you will be granted power beyond your wildest dreams." I looked at the pendant in his hand, then down at the one around my neck. The weight of it felt unbearable now, like it was crushing me from the inside out. I didn't want power. I didn't want any of this. But I knew I couldn't leave. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. With trembling hands, I took the pendant from him. The moment my fingers closed around it, the room seemed to shift. The walls, the floor, even the air itself, everything felt like it was vibrating, pulsing in time with the beat of my heart. The other figures began to chant, their voices low and rhythmic, echoing in my mind. The leader gestured for me to place the second pendant on the altar. I did as he asked, my movements slow and deliberate, as if I was moving through water. The moment the pendant touched the stone, a blinding light filled the room, and the chanting grew louder, more intense. I felt a surge of energy, a force so powerful it knocked me back, sending me sprawling to the floor. The light was everywhere, surrounding me, suffocating me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The pendant around my neck burned hot, and I felt as if I was being consumed by the fire within it. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The chanting stopped, and the room was plunged into darkness. I lay there gasping for breath, my body trembling from the aftershocks of whatever had just happened. The leader stood over me, his eyes glowing in the darkness. "It is done," he said, his voice calm and emotionless. "You have fulfilled your role." I didn't understand. What had I done? What was my role? But before I could ask, the leader turned and walked away, followed by the other two figures. They left me there, alone in the darkness, with nothing but the fading glow of the symbols on the altar to keep me company. I struggled to my feet, feeling weak and disoriented. The pendant around my neck was cool again, the strange energy that had filled the room now gone. I knew I had to leave, to get out of that place before something else happened. I stumbled back through the corridors, my steps unsteady, until I finally emerged into the cold night air. As I made my way home, my mind raced with unanswered questions. What had they done to me? What was this power they spoke of? And why did I feel as if something inside me had changed? Something I couldn't quite explain. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted and drained. The pendant still hung around my neck, its weight a constant reminder of the events that had transpired. But as I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I realized something had shifted inside me. A darkness, a hunger that hadn't been there before. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to know. All I knew was that my life would never be the same. The messages stopped after that night. The pendant, once a source of fear and confusion, now felt like a part of me, as if it had fused with my very being. I tried to go back to my normal life, but it was impossible. The memories of the ritual, the voices in the darkness, and the presence of Altar 13 haunted my every waking moment. And the dreams continued. They were different now, though, no longer filled with shadows and fear, but with a sense of purpose, of power. In those dreams, I saw myself standing at the head of a group, just like the one I had encountered. Their faces were obscured, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural light I had seen in Altar 13's eyes. They were waiting for me, waiting for their leader. I had become one of them, and deep down, I knew there was no escaping it. As much as I tried to deny it, to resist it, I could feel it growing inside me. The power, the hunger, the darkness. It was only a matter of time before I embraced it fully, before I accepted the role I had been given. And when that time came, I would be ready. I've always had a morbid curiosity about the dark web, not for anything illegal, but more out of fascination with the hidden parts of the internet that most people never see. It was like a digital underworld, full of secrets, and I couldn't resist the temptation to explore. I'm not a hacker or anything special, just a regular guy who happened to know how to navigate through Tor and a few forums. I'd spent some time browsing the usual stuff. Conspiracy theories, urban legends, and the kind of bizarre content you'd expect to find in the depths of the internet. But one night, I stumbled upon something different. It was a forum that looked like it hadn't been active in years. The title of the thread was The Enlightened Path, which immediately caught my attention. It seemed to be a discussion about an ancient philosophy or something. People were sharing cryptic messages talking about ascending and seeing beyond the veil. I couldn't make much sense of it, but it was intriguing in a weird way. As I scrolled through the thread, I noticed a question posted by someone with the username Veil Seeker. The question was simple. What is the key to the other side? Now, I'm no philosopher, but I'd read enough online to know that this was probably some metaphorical nonsense. For some reason, the phrase, "the mind is the key," popped into my head. It was something I'd read somewhere, probably in some self-help book or one of those cheesy inspirational quotes that float around the internet. Without thinking much of it, I typed out the answer and hit send. A few seconds later, I got a notification. "You've been selected. Welcome, Enlightened One." I thought it was some kind of joke. Who wouldn't? But the thing is, after I posted that reply, everything started to get weird. It began with emails, hundreds of them, flooding my inbox, all from different addresses, but the content was eerily similar. They all referred to me as the Chosen One and included cryptic messages about leading a movement, fulfilling a destiny, and guiding others to the true path. At first I ignored them, thinking it was just some elaborate trolling. But then the messages started appearing on my phone too. Texts from unknown numbers, notifications on apps I didn't even have installed. They were all saying the same thing, urging me to accept my role as the leader of this supposed movement. The final straw was when I started receiving packages at my door. Each one contained bizarre items, books in languages I couldn't read, strange symbols drawn on parchment paper, and what looked like handwritten letters, again addressing me as the Chosen One. The letters talked about my accidental enlightenment and how it was my destiny to guide the cult, or whatever it was, to their next stage of evolution. By now, I was beyond freaked out. I even considered going to the police, but what would I say? "Hey, I think a dark web cult is trying to recruit me because I answered a random question on a forum?" That would have sounded insane, and honestly, I wasn't even sure if what was happening was real or just an elaborate prank. But then things escalated. One night, I was out with some friends at a bar when I noticed a guy sitting alone at a table, staring directly at me. He was dressed in all black, with a hood pulled over his head. At first, I thought he was just some random dude, but the longer he stared, the more uncomfortable I became. His gaze never wavered, and there was something in his eyes that made my skin crawl. I decided to leave early, but as I walked out of the bar, I saw him again, this time standing across the street, still watching me. It was like he knew every move I was going to make. I got into my car and drove home as fast as I could, but that sense of being watched never left me. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. The emails, the texts, the packages, and now this guy. It was too much to be a coincidence. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into the forum where it all started. But when I tried to access it, the site was gone. It was like it had never existed. No cached pages, no archives, nothing. It was wiped clean. Panic set in. I felt like I was in way over my head, tangled in something far more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I received a message that changed everything. It was an email, but this time it wasn't from some anonymous address. It was from someone named Initiator, and the subject line read, "Your ascension begins tonight." The email was short, just a few lines, but it chilled me to the bone. "Prepare yourself, Enlightened One. We are coming for you. Your leadership is needed. The path awaits." I sat there staring at the screen, trying to process what I was reading. Were they serious? Was this some twisted game? I had no idea, but one thing was clear. They were coming, and I had no way of stopping them. I didn't sleep at all after receiving that email. Every creak in my apartment, every distant sound from the street below, felt like a sign that they were coming. I kept checking the locks on my door, peeking through the blinds, half expecting to see shadowy figures lurking outside. But the night passed without incident, and by morning I was a wreck, exhausted, paranoid, and completely on edge. I knew I couldn't go on like this. If this was some kind of sick joke, I needed to figure out who was behind it. And if it wasn't, if this cult was real, I had to find a way to stop them. I decided to take the day off work, partly because I was in no state to focus, but also because I felt like I needed to be home to protect myself. Not that I had any idea how to do that. My first step was to try and trace the email. I'm no tech genius, but I know a thing or two about how emails work. I tried tracking the IP address, but it led nowhere, a dead end, like whoever sent it knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Frustrated, I moved on to the contents of the email, looking for any clues, any hidden meanings, but it was just as cryptic as everything else. I spent hours obsessing over it, my anxiety growing with each passing minute. By the afternoon, I felt like I was losing my mind. I needed to get out, to clear my head, so I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. Maybe some fresh air would help me think more clearly, but as soon as I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. I glanced around, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just people going about their day. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was tracking my every move. I forced myself to keep walking, but my pace quickened as my paranoia grew. Then I saw him. The same guy from the bar dressed in black, standing at the end of the block, staring at me. My heart pounded in my chest. I considered turning around, but I didn't want to show fear. I kept walking, pretending not to notice him, but as I got closer, I could see him more clearly. There was something unsettling about his expression. It was blank, emotionless, but his eyes were intense, locked onto me with a kind of determination that sent shivers down my spine. I walked past him, keeping my head down, but the second I was out of his sight, I started running. I didn't care if anyone saw me. I just needed to get away. I ran through side streets, cutting through alleys, trying to lose him. When I finally stopped, I was out of breath, my heart racing, but I was alone, for the moment at least. I decided to head to a nearby coffee shop, somewhere public where I could sit and think. I ordered a coffee and found a seat in the corner, my back to the wall so I could see everyone who came in. As I sat there, I couldn't stop thinking about the guy in black. Who was he? Why was he following me? And more importantly, what did he want? I pulled out my phone and started searching for anything I could find about cults on the dark web, specifically anything that matched the bizarre things I'd encountered. But most of what I found was either outdated or too vague to be of any help. I kept digging, trying different search terms when I stumbled upon a forum post that caught my attention. It was on a different site, but the topic was similar. Someone talking about a group that called themselves the Enlightened. The post was from years ago, but it described a similar experience to mine. Strange emails, cryptic messages, and a feeling of being hunted. The author of the post claimed that the group believed in some kind of prophecy, that they were looking for a leader to guide them through a great awakening, or something like that. But what really caught my eye was the last line of the post. If they've chosen you, there's no escape. Run, hide, it doesn't matter. They will find you. I felt a chill run down my spine. Could this be the same group? The same cult? It had to be. The similarities were too strong to ignore. But if that was true, then what did it mean for me? Was I really in danger? Or was this just some elaborate hoax designed to scare people like me? I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of it all. The coffee shop buzzed with the usual sounds of conversation and clinking cups, but I felt completely detached, like I was in a different world. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just ignore this. If these people were serious, if they really believed I was their chosen one, then I had to do something. But what? I couldn't go to the police. What would I even say? And I couldn't just pack up and leave town. They'd find me, just like the post said. I was trapped, with no idea who to trust or where to turn. As I was leaving the coffee shop, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on the counter by the register, was a small card. It was white with a single symbol printed on it, a symbol I recognized from one of the packages I'd received. It was a circle with a line through it, like an eye that had been crossed out. I picked up the card with trembling hands, flipping it over. On the back, written in neat, precise handwriting, was a single word: tonight. I dropped the card and bolted out of the coffee shop, my mind racing. What was going to happen tonight? Was this some kind of warning or a threat? I had no idea, but one thing was clear. I needed to be prepared. I spent the rest of the day in a state of constant anxiety, checking the time every few minutes, jumping at every little noise. When night finally fell, I locked every door and window, double-checked every possible entry point, and sat in the dark, waiting. Hours passed and nothing happened, but the tension only grew. Every minute felt like an eternity. My nerves on edge, my mind conjuring up all sorts of terrifying possibilities. I was so caught up in my own fear that I didn't even notice the shadows outside my window until it was too late. A knock on the door shattered the silence and my heart nearly stopped. It was a soft knock, almost polite, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I didn't move, didn't breathe, hoping whoever it was would just go away. But the knock came again, more insistent this time, and then, from the other side of the door, I heard a voice. Calm, composed, and utterly terrifying. "Enlightened one, we've come for you. It's time." I can't even describe the terror that washed over me when I heard that voice on the other side of the door. My mind was racing, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I had no idea what to do. I was trapped in my own apartment, with nowhere to run, and these people, whoever they were right outside, waiting for me. I stayed completely still, barely breathing, hoping that if I didn't make a sound, they might think I wasn't home. But deep down, I knew that was a long shot. These people had found me, and they weren't going to leave without getting what they came for. The voice called out again, calm, but with an eerie sense of certainty. "We know you're in there. There's no need to be afraid, Enlightened One. We're here to guide you. Open the door and your path will become clear." My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone, trying to think of who I could call. But as I stared at the screen, I realized that it wouldn't help. What was I going to say? Call the police and tell them that a cult was outside my door, demanding that I become their leader? They'd think I was crazy. And even if they did take me seriously, what could they do? These people had found me, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I felt trapped, cornered like a wild animal. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The apartment was dark and silent, every creak of the floorboards amplified by my fear. The only light came from the faint glow of my phone, casting long shadows across the room. Then I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. The unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. My front door slowly creaked open, and I knew without a doubt that they were inside. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted out of the bedroom, my mind screaming at me to get out, to find any way to escape. I ran down the hallway, heading for the back door that led to the fire escape. But as I reached the door, I froze. Standing in the doorway was the man in black, the same one who had been following me for days. His face was shadowed by the hood, but I could see the faint glint of his eyes, cold and determined. He blocked the only exit, and I knew I was trapped. "Please," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not your leader. You've made a mistake." The man didn't move. He just stood there, silent, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in that same calm, measured tone. "There are no mistakes, Enlightened One. You were chosen, and the path has led us to you. Embrace your destiny and you will see the truth." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't wrap my head around what he was saying. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. I wasn't some enlightened leader. I was just a guy who had stumbled onto the wrong corner of the internet. But as I looked into the man's eyes, I realized that reasoning with him was pointless. He believed every word he was saying, and nothing I could say would change that. I took a step back, trying to put some distance between us, but there was nowhere to go. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in on me as the man in black slowly advanced. I was trapped, with no way out. Then something unexpected happened. The man paused, his head tilting slightly as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. For a moment, his expression changed, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. I didn't understand what was going on, but I seized the opportunity. I bolted past him, ducking under his arm and racing for the front door. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. My only thought was to get out of that apartment and as far away from these people as possible. I ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time, my heart pounding in my chest. The whole time I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder pulling me back, but it never came. I burst out of the building and into the night, the cool air hitting me like a splash of cold water. My lungs were burning, my legs shaking from adrenaline, but I kept running. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, hidden in the shadows of an alleyway, gasping for breath. It took a while for my mind to catch up with what had just happened. I was free, at least for the moment, but I knew it wasn't over. They'd found me once, and they'd find me again. I couldn't go back to my apartment, couldn't go to the police. I had to keep moving, stay ahead of them, somehow figure out how to end this nightmare. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I realized that I had no idea where to go. I was alone, hunted by a cult that believed I was their leader, with no one to turn to and no plan for what to do next. The reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks, and for the first time I felt truly, utterly hopeless. Then, in the silence of the alleyway, I heard a voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. "You can't run, enlightened one. The path is already set. You will lead us, or you will perish." I whipped around, but there was no one there, just the empty street, the distant hum of the city, and the dark shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. But I knew without a doubt that they were still watching me. They would always be watching me, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I don't know how long I stood in that alley, trying to make sense of what was happening. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion, every thought tangled in the growing realization that I was in way over my head. I needed a plan, something, anything, to keep myself safe. But as I looked around, all I saw were shadows and darkness, the city suddenly feeling like a hostile, unfamiliar place. I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving. But where? My apartment was out of the question. They'd already found me there, and going back would be like walking into a trap. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't expect me to go. But more than anything, I needed time to think, to figure out who these people were and what they really wanted from me. I started walking, keeping to the side streets and avoiding anyone who might see me. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't dare use it. What if they were tracking it? What if every step I took was being monitored? The paranoia was eating away at me, making me second-guess everything. Eventually, I found myself outside a 24-hour diner, the neon sign buzzing faintly in the cool night air. It wasn't much, but it was bright, busy enough to feel safe, and most importantly, anonymous. I slipped inside, the warm light and the smell of coffee offering a brief reprieve from the terror that had gripped me all night. I took a seat in the back, away from the windows, and ordered a coffee I didn't plan to drink. My hands were still shaking, and every time the door opened, I tensed, half expecting one of them to walk in and find me. But for now, I was alone, surrounded by strangers who had no idea what kind of nightmare I was living. I pulled out my phone, careful to keep it out of sight, and hesitated. Every instinct told me not to use it, but I needed answers, and the internet was my only lifeline. I typed in the same search terms as before, looking for anything that might help me understand who these people were. After a few minutes of digging, I found a blog post buried deep in the search results. It was from a few years back, written by someone who claimed to have had a run-in with a group that sounded eerily similar to the one that was chasing me. The post was long and rambling, full of conspiracy theories and warnings about secret societies, but there was one part that stood out. The writer mentioned a ritual, something called the Ascension, where the group would choose a new leader through some kind of test or trial. The details were vague, but the writer insisted that anyone who passed the test, even by accident, was marked as the new leader, destined to guide the group through their final awakening. The post ended with a dire warning. Once chosen, there is no escape. They will stop at nothing to claim what is theirs. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This was exactly what had happened to me. I'd answered that stupid question on the forum without thinking, and now these people believed I was their leader. But what did that mean? What did they expect from me? And how far would they go to get it? As I sat there trying to process everything, I heard the door to the diner open again. I didn't look up at first, too focused on the screen in front of me. But then I felt it, that familiar sensation of being watched. My heart skipped a beat and I forced myself to look up. A man had just walked in, tall and nondescript, dressed in a plain gray jacket and jeans. There was nothing particularly menacing about him, but something in the way he carried himself, the way his eyes scanned the room before landing on me, set off alarm bells in my head. He didn't approach right away. Instead, he took a seat at the counter, ordering a coffee, and I watched him out of the corner of my eye, trying to stay calm. He hadn't made any move towards me, hadn't done anything suspicious, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was there because of me. I needed to leave, but how? If I got up and walked out, would he follow me? What if he was waiting for me to make a move? The tension was unbearable, every second stretching into an eternity as I tried to figure out what to do. Then, just as I was about to make a break for it, the man turned in his seat and looked directly at me. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I was paralyzed with fear. But then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, more like an acknowledgement, like he knew exactly who I was and what I was going through. He raised his coffee cup in a silent toast, his smile never wavering, and that's when I knew. He was one of them. Panic surged through me, and I bolted out of the booth, nearly knocking over my untouched coffee as I made a beeline for the door. I didn't look back, didn't stop to see if he was following. I just ran, out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put as much distance between myself and that diner as possible. I didn't stop running until I was sure I'd lost him. I ducked into another alley, panting, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. They were everywhere. No matter where I went, they would find me. There was no escape. But as I leaned against the cold brick wall trying to catch my breath, a new thought crossed my mind. Maybe running wasn't the answer. Maybe I needed to confront them, to figure out what they really wanted. It was risky, but what other choice did I have? I couldn't keep running forever, and hiding wasn't working. I pulled out my phone, my hand still shaking, and opened the email from Initiator, the one that had started it all. I stared at the words, "Your ascension begins tonight," and felt a surge of anger. This had to end. I was done being their puppet, done living in fear. Without giving myself time to second guess, I typed out a reply. "If you want me, come get me. But this ends tonight." I hit send before I could change my mind, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for a response. Minutes passed, then an hour, but nothing came. The silence was deafening, my own thoughts growing louder as I replayed the night's events in my mind. Finally, just as I was beginning to think they wouldn't respond, my phone buzzed. It was a new message, not from Initiator, but from an unknown number. The text was short, just 2 words, but they sent a shiver down my spine. Look up. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly I raised my eyes, looking out of the alley and into the street beyond. And there, standing at the mouth of the alley, was a group of figures, their faces hidden in the shadows, watching me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. There was no mistaking it. They were here, and they weren't alone. The moment I saw them, a cold dread washed over me. They stood at the entrance of the alley, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. There were 5 of them, maybe more, all dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by shadows. They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there like they were waiting for me to make the first move. I knew this was it. There was no running now, no more hiding. This had to end, one way or another. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I was going to get through this, I needed to keep my head. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, moving slowly, deliberately, until I was just a few feet away from them. They didn't react, didn't acknowledge me, just watched in eerie silence. The tension was suffocating, every second dragging out as I waited for them to do something. Anything. Finally, one of them stepped forward. It was the man from the diner, the one who had smiled at me. He pulled back his hood, revealing a face that was strangely ordinary. Plain features, short hair, nothing that would stand out in a crowd. But his eyes were intense, filled with a calm certainty that made my skin crawl. "Enlightened one," he said, his voice low and even. "You've come to accept your destiny." It wasn't a question. He said it like it was a fact, like there was no other possible outcome. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to something so surreal, so utterly bizarre. But I knew I had to say something, had to take control of the situation before it spiraled out of my hands. "I'm not who you think I am," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "I'm just a guy who answered a question on the internet. I don't know anything about your cult or your beliefs or whatever this is. You've got the wrong person." The man's expression didn't change. He just kept watching me, like he was trying to see through my words to the truth underneath. "There are no mistakes," he said calmly. "The path has chosen you, just as it has chosen all of us. You are the enlightened one, destined to lead us into the final awakening." I felt a surge of frustration, mixed with a growing sense of hopelessness. It didn't matter what I said. These people were convinced that I was their leader, and nothing was going to change their minds. But why? Why me? What had I done to deserve this? "Why me?" I demanded, my voice rising despite myself. "I don't understand any of this. I'm not some prophet or leader or whatever you think I am. I'm just a regular guy. What makes you so sure I'm the one you've been looking for?" For the first time, the man hesitated. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if considering how much to tell me. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small worn book. It looked ancient, the leather cover cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. He held it out to me, but I didn't take it. "This is the path," he said, his voice reverent. "It's been passed down through generations, a guide to the awakening that will lead us all to the truth. The one who answers the question correctly, what is the key to the other side, is the one chosen to lead us. You answered it, and the path led us to you." I stared at the book, not sure what to make of it. The whole thing sounded insane, like something out of a bad horror movie. But as much as I wanted to dismiss it, there was something in the man's eyes, something in the way he spoke that made me realize how serious this was. These people truly believed in what they were saying, and they were willing to do anything to see it through. "I'm not who you think I am," I repeated more softly this time. "I don't know anything about your path or your awakening. I just want to go back to my life, to forget this ever happened." The man's expression softened, but only slightly. "You cannot unsee the truth," he said. "The path has been set, and there is no turning back. But you don't have to be afraid. We're here to guide you, to help you fulfill your destiny. Together, we will bring about the final awakening." I looked around at the others, their faces still hidden in the shadows, and felt a wave of despair. They were all so certain, so unwavering in their belief that I was the one they had been searching for. But I wasn't. I wasn't some enlightened leader. I was just a guy who had stumbled onto something I never should have seen. But then, as I stood there, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the realization that running wasn't going to help. Or maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of being hunted for so long. But suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Angry that my life had been turned upside down by these people, by this twisted belief system that had nothing to do with me. Angry that I had been pushed to the brink, forced to live in fear because of something I didn't even understand. I was done running, done hiding. If they wanted me to be their leader, fine. But I was going to do it on my terms. "All right," I said, my voice firm. "I'll lead you, but this ends tonight. No more chasing, no more threats. If I'm really your enlightened one, then you'll listen to me. And the first thing I'm telling you is that this stops now." The man in front of me blinked, clearly taken aback by my sudden change in tone. For a moment there was silence, and I could see the others shifting uneasily, unsure of how to respond. But then, slowly, the man nodded. "As you wish, enlightened one," he said, his voice still calm, but with a hint of something else. "Respect, maybe, or understanding. The path is yours to guide. We will follow." I didn't know what to say. I had expected them to push back, to argue, maybe even to try and force me into their twisted beliefs. But instead they were willing to listen, to follow my lead. It was both terrifying and empowering, this sudden shift in control. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Good," I said. "Then let's talk. I want to know everything about your path, your beliefs, why you think I'm the one. But first I want you all to leave. Give me some time to think, to process all of this. I'll contact you when I'm ready." The man hesitated for a moment, but then he nodded again. "As you wish, enlightened one. We will be waiting." And just like that, they turned and left, melting into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I stood there, alone in the alley, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. I had done it. I had taken control, turned the tables on them, but as I watched them disappear into the night, I realized that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. They believed in me, believed I was their leader, and that meant I had power over them. But with that power came responsibility. Responsibility for whatever happened next, for whatever path I chose to lead them down. I didn't want it. I didn't want any of this. But it was too late to go back now. The path had been set, and whether I liked it or not, I was on it. The next morning, I packed a bag and left the city, not sure where I was going, but knowing I needed to get away to clear my head. I wasn't running. I was preparing. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, what these people really wanted, and how I could protect myself from them. As I drove away, the sun rising behind me, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. For the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I could really lead these people, or if I even wanted to. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going to let them control me. I was the one in charge now, and whatever came next, I was ready. So this is going to sound crazy, but I need to get it off my chest. A few months ago, I was having one of those nights where you just can't sleep. You know the kind, up late, aimlessly browsing the internet. I ended up on Reddit, bouncing between different subreddits. I eventually landed on a conspiracy theory forum. Usually I just read for fun, you know? It's like reading a thriller novel. Anyway, I saw this thread about the dark web. I've always been curious, but also kind of scared of that stuff. I mean, you hear all these stories about horrible things you can find there. Illegal activities, creepy videos, all sorts of messed up stuff. Someone in the comments posted a link. It didn't look too weird, just a regular URL. The comment said something like, "For those who want to know the truth about September 16th, 2024. I don't know what came over me, but I clicked on it. The link took me to this really old-looking web page. No fancy graphics or anything, just plain text. The page was titled The Final Countdown, and it was all about a conspiracy theory that the world would end on September 16th, 2024. At first, I laughed it off. I've seen so many end-of-the-world predictions, and they're always wrong. But as I kept reading, it got under my skin. The page had all these details, like a timeline of events leading up to that date. It talked about natural disasters, political issues, and even some stuff about the economy. It was all woven together to point to this one date. There were links to news articles, scientific papers, and even what looked like leaked government documents. One part that really freaked me out was about the catalyst event. According to the theory, on September 16th, 2024, there would be a global blackout. All electronics would stop working at the same time, and it would throw the world into chaos. The blackout was supposed to be the start of a chain reaction that would lead to the collapse of society. There wasn't any explanation for how or why, just that it would happen. I got chills reading it. It was different from the usual doomsday stuff because it had so much detail. It almost seemed possible. I couldn't stop thinking about it. After that night, I started looking into it more. I spent hours on the internet, searching for any mention of September 16th, 2024. I found a few things: reports of increased solar activity, articles about rising political tensions, weird patterns in the stock market. Nothing definite, but enough to make me think twice. I didn't tell anyone about it. I knew it sounded crazy, and I didn't want people to think I was losing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to happen. Then, about a month after I found that page, I got an email. It was from an address I didn't recognize, and the subject line was just September 16th, 2024. My heart was pounding as I opened it. The message was short. "You've seen the signs. Prepare yourself." Alright, so after that creepy email, I was totally freaked out. I couldn't stop thinking about what life would be like without electricity. It's easy to take it for granted, but if it suddenly disappeared, we'd be in serious trouble. First off, think about cooking. Most of us use electric stoves or microwaves. No electricity means no cooking. If you have a gas stove, you might get by for a bit, but eventually the gas would run out too. Then there's the fridge. Without power, everything in there would spoil pretty quickly. We'd be stuck eating canned food and snacks that don't need to be kept cold. Water is another big issue. A lot of water systems use electric pumps, so no power means no running water. We'd have to figure out how to get and purify our own water. That's not something most people know how to do. And communication? We'd be in the dark, literally and figuratively. No phones, no internet, no TV. We'd have no idea what's going on or how to get help if we needed it. Emergency services would be overwhelmed or completely unavailable. We'd be on our own. So I started preparing. I bought a bunch of canned food, bottled water, and other supplies. I got a manual can opener and some basic tools. I even got a crank-powered radio so I could get news if things went south. It felt weird, like I was turning into one of those doomsday preppers, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming. I talked to a couple of friends about it, but they just laughed. They thought I was falling for some online prank or hoax. Maybe I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be ready, just in case. Weeks went by and I kept prepping. I looked up how to find fresh water, how to start a fire without matches, and other survival skills. It felt a bit over the top, but I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. That email kept playing in my head, You've seen the signs. Prepare yourself. I didn't know if I was going crazy or if I was the only one who saw what was coming. But September 16th, 2024 is getting closer. I kept thinking about what life would be like without electricity, especially when it came to dealing with the weather. It's easy to forget how much we rely on power to stay comfortable and safe. Take summer, for example. Without air conditioning or fans, heat waves could be brutal. People could get really sick from the heat. Heat stroke, dehydration, that kind of stuff. It's not just uncomfortable. It can actually be dangerous, especially for older people or those with health problems. Winter would be a whole other nightmare. No electricity means no heating. Imagine trying to stay warm when it's freezing outside. Pipes could freeze and burst, making it even harder to get water. We'd need to rely on blankets, extra layers of clothing, or try to make fires to keep warm. But let's be real. Most of us don't know how to safely heat our homes without modern stuff. Hypothermia and frostbite would be real concerns. It hit me that most people wouldn't know how to deal with this. We're so used to having electricity for everything. Without it, a lot of people wouldn't make it through extreme weather. The most vulnerable would suffer the most. I kept preparing, even though it felt a bit over the top. I got extra blankets and warm clothes. I learned how to insulate my house better and how to start fires safely. I stocked up on water purification tablets and non-perishable food. It felt weird, like I was prepping for the end of the world, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming. My friends still thought I was nuts. They joked about my survival kit and called me paranoid. But I couldn't shake it. September 16th, 2024 is coming, and I had to be ready for whatever might happen. So as the date is getting closer, I kept thinking about what will happen if the blackout really hit. One of the scariest parts was imagining the chaos around money and food. If all the power went out, people with money in the bank or on their credit cards would be out of luck. No ATMs, no online payments. Cash would probably be useless too because there'd be no cameras or alarms to stop people from just taking what they needed. I could picture it clearly. People would start to panic. They'd get desperate. When you're hungry and thirsty, you'll do anything to survive. There would be fights over food, water, and other essentials. It could get violent quickly. Stores would get looted, and people would break into homes. It was a terrifying thought. To prepare, I started learning basic survival skills. I had stocked up on supplies, but I wanted to be ready for anything. I watched videos and read articles about surviving in the wild. I learned how to start a fire without matches, build a simple shelter, and even hunt small animals. It felt strange, like I was prepping for some kind of apocalypse, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was necessary. Water was another big concern. Clean water is crucial, and without power, it could be hard to come by. I learned how to filter and purify water using simple methods. I bought a few portable water filters and some purification tablets just to be safe. Knowing I had a plan for water made me feel a bit more secure. Every day the date is getting closer, and every day I feel more anxious. My friends keep teasing me, saying I was overreacting, but I couldn't help it. September 16th, 2024 is coming, and I needed to be ready for whatever might happen. Alright, here's the thing. This whole blackout scenario, it's still just a conspiracy theory. Nothing is proven, and there's no solid evidence that it will actually happen. September 16th, 2024 is still in the future, and we don't know what's coming. But if you've been following my journey and you want my advice, it doesn't hurt to be prepared. Think about it. Life is full of uncertainties. We prepare for all sorts of things just in case. We have fire drills, we buy insurance, we save money for emergencies. So learning some survival skills and stocking up on essentials isn't that different. It's just another way to be ready for whatever life throws at us. Start with the basics. Knowing how to find and purify water is crucial. Without clean water, survival becomes really tough. Learn how to use water purification tablets or how to boil water to make it safe to drink. If you live near a natural water source, figure out how you'd access it if needed. It's a simple skill, but it could be a lifesaver. Next, think about food. Stock up on non-perishable items like canned goods, dried fruits, nuts, and grains. These foods can last a long time and don't need refrigeration. Make sure you have a manual can opener too. It sounds silly, but if there's no electricity, electric can openers are useless. Also, consider learning some basic hunting and foraging skills. Even if you never need to use them, it's good knowledge to have. Fire is another important element. Without electricity, staying warm and cooking food becomes a challenge. Learn how to start a fire without matches. There are plenty of techniques using flint, steel, or even a magnifying glass. Practice these skills so you're not scrambling to figure it out when you need it. I'm not usually the kind of person who goes on the dark web. Honestly, the whole thing freaks me out. But a few months ago, I was going through some stuff and ended up there one night. I don't even remember how I got there, but I started clicking around on different forums out of boredom. I found this one forum called The Final Countdown, or something like that. It looked super old school with a black background and green text. Most of the threads were typical conspiracy theory stuff, aliens, government secrets, that kind of thing. But one thread caught my eye. It was called The True End of Humanity. I thought it was going to be about another crazy theory, but it turned out to be something way more disturbing. The person who posted it had the username Starlight Reaper. They were talking about a rogue star they called the Wanderer that was supposedly on its way towards Earth. Not a planet, but a star, smaller and colder than our sun. According to them, when it gets close enough, it will cause a new ice age. They said temperatures would drop so much that it would kill almost everything. The post had charts, data, and all sorts of sciencey stuff that seemed really legit. At first I thought it was just a well-written prank, but the more I read, the more freaked out I got. Starlight Reaper mentioned real scientific papers and events that I remembered hearing about in the news. It wasn't just random nonsense, it had actual references and links to real articles. Other users were commenting on the post, and some of them seemed just as skeptical as I was. But then there were people who claimed to have their own evidence. One user, Cold Eclipse, said they were an amateur astronomer and posted some grainy images and data that matched what Starlight Reaper had shared. Another user, Frostbite, claimed to be a former government worker and hinted that world leaders knew about the Wanderer but were keeping it secret to avoid panic. I spent hours reading through the thread, getting more and more anxious. It was late at night and my room was dark except for the light from my laptop. The whole thing was starting to get to me. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see snow falling, even though it was summer. The last post I read that night was from Starlight Reaper. He was replying to someone who didn't believe him. Instead of trying to convince them with more data, he just wrote, "Watch the sky. The Wanderer is coming. Prepare while you still can." I closed my laptop, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of a rogue star causing an ice age sounded crazy, but everything I read made it feel real. I had nightmares that night, dreams of a world covered in ice with no one left alive. Over the next few days, I couldn't get it out of my head. I kept going back to the forum, hoping someone would debunk the whole thing. But instead, more people were joining in and adding their own evidence. It was like a snowball effect, getting bigger and more believable with each new post. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it either. Hey everyone, back with part 2 of the weird forum I found on the dark web. So after spending way too much time reading through that thread, I started focusing on the details about how this supposed ice age would start. According to Starlight Reaper and a few others, it wouldn't just hit us out of nowhere. It would begin like any normal winter, nothing too crazy at first. Starlight Reaper explained that the first sign would be an early winter, but not just a week or two early, more like months early. People would probably think it's just another weird weather pattern, something related to climate change. But this would be the start of something much bigger. One of the creepiest parts was about how even the hottest places on Earth would start getting colder. Imagine the Sahara Desert or places near the equator, where it's usually blazing hot. According to the posts, these places would start cooling down significantly. It wouldn't happen overnight, but over a few weeks, places that are always warm would become strangely cold. It was really hard to believe, but the way they described it made it seem possible. They had charts and graphs showing temperature trends. They talked about slight drops in temperature in warm regions at first, then a rapid drop everywhere. They even linked to weather reports from past years that showed odd patterns, claiming these were early signs. I know weather can be unpredictable, but this was a whole new level of strange. People on the forum were sharing their own predictions and calculations. There were graphs showing how, after the first strange winter, temperatures would start falling rapidly everywhere. It would begin with cold snaps in places that usually don't get cold. Cities near the equator would see frost for the first time ever, snow in places that have never seen snow before. One of the posts that stuck with me was from a user named Climate Watcher. They laid out a timeline of what would happen week by week once the wanderer got close enough. They said that within the first month, people would notice really cold weather spreading everywhere. By the second month, there would be big problems with agriculture. Crops that need warm weather would start dying, leading to food shortages. Then within 3 months, we'd be in a full-blown ice age. The cold would become unbearable. Power grids would fail because everyone would be trying to heat their homes. Buildings in warm areas, not built to handle freezing temperatures, would start to collapse. The posts described a picture of chaos and desperation. What really freaked me out was how detailed these posts were. They had references, links to scientific papers, and detailed explanations. It felt like these people really believed what they were saying. Even though I was skeptical, I couldn't help but feel a chill reading through all this. The idea of the whole planet slowly freezing over, starting with places that have never known cold, was terrifying. It felt like watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, one that we couldn't stop. Hey everyone, I'm back with part 3 of the weird forum story. So after reading all those posts about the coming ice age, I found some discussions on how the media would handle the situation. According to the forum members, the media would play a big role in keeping everyone calm and preventing panic. Starlight Reaper and others on the forum believed that when the weather started getting weird, the media would explain it away as climate change, or just a temporary cold wave. They said that news channels would start reporting that the unusual cold was just part of a natural cycle and nothing to worry about. One user, Media Mogul, claimed to know someone working in a big news network. According to them, there were already plans to release statements about the cold wave being a short-term thing. The goal was to keep people from freaking out. They wanted everyone to believe it was just another strange weather event that would pass soon. There was also talk about social media. They said social media would be filled with hashtags like #ColdWave2024 or Winter Blues, making it seem like just another trending topic. Influencers and celebrities might be asked to post funny videos and memes to keep things lighthearted and distract people from the real issue. A lot of people on the forum thought this approach would only make things worse. They believed that once people realized how bad things were, it would be too late to prepare. They shared examples of past events where the media had downplayed serious situations, which only caused more problems later on. The forum was full of advice on how to get ready without drawing too much attention. People talked about stocking up on food, learning basic survival skills, and even moving to more remote areas. There was this feeling that time was running out and everyone needed to prepare quietly. The way they explained everything, with all the data and personal stories, it just got to me. The more I read, the more I thought, what if this is real? I found myself thinking about it all the time. I'd be at work, hanging out with friends, or just doing normal stuff, and in the back of my mind I was always wondering if this was really going to happen. I started noticing any little change in the weather, and every news report about cold snaps or weird weather patterns made me think of the Wanderer. But then I realized there was nothing I could do about it. If this was really going to happen, what could I do to stop it? Moving to a remote area or stocking up on supplies might help, but it also felt pointless if the whole world was going to freeze over. So I kind of just accepted it. I kept living my life, but with this weird sense of doom hanging over me. It was like knowing a big secret that no one else did. I didn't tell anyone about it because it sounded insane. Hey, by the way, I read on a dark web forum that a rogue star is going to cause an ice age and wipe us all out. Yeah, that wouldn't go over well. Instead, I just tried to go on as normal. I focused on my daily routine, my job, my friends and family. But there was always that nagging thought in the back of my head. I kept checking the forum every now and then to see if there were any updates or new pieces of information. The posts continued, with more people joining and sharing their own bits of evidence. I wish I could say that I found a way to prove it wrong, but I didn't. I just kept living with this strange, unsettling feeling that something big might be coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Hey everyone, back with part 5 to wrap this up. So after everything I read on that forum, the final message was clear. If this really happens, it will be the end of humanity. The posts talked about how the air would get so cold that just breathing it in could freeze your lungs. Imagine stepping outside and feeling your breath turn to ice instantly. It sounded like something out of a horror movie, but the way they described it made it seem terrifyingly real. They painted a picture of total chaos, power grids failing, food shortages, and people struggling to survive in temperatures that no one is prepared for. It's hard to imagine what life would be like if everything we take for granted just stopped working because of the cold. They talked about how hospitals wouldn't be able to handle the influx of patients with frostbite and hypothermia. People would start burning whatever they could find to keep warm: furniture, books, even parts of their houses. Cities would become ghost towns as people fled to rural areas, thinking they might have a better chance of surviving away from the masses. One of the forum posts described how our entire way of life would collapse. Transportation systems would fail because vehicles and trains wouldn't work properly in extreme cold. Water pipes would freeze and burst, leading to water shortages. The food supply chain would be disrupted, causing widespread hunger and panic. Grocery stores would be emptied in days, and looting would become a common sight. Schools and businesses would shut down indefinitely. Communication networks might also fail, making it hard to get information or call for help. It's the kind of scenario that feels impossible to comprehend because it's so far from anything we've ever experienced. I remember reading one particularly chilling post that described how animals would also struggle to survive. Most wildlife wouldn't be able to adapt quickly enough to the sudden cold. There would be mass die-offs of birds, fish, and other animals that rely on specific temperatures to live. The ecosystem would take a massive hit, and the impact would be felt for generations. But here's the thing, it's all just a conspiracy theory for now. There's no solid proof that the Wanderer is real or that it's going to cause an ice age. It's just a lot of people sharing their fears and speculations on a forum. Some scientists and experts have dismissed these claims as pure fiction, saying there's no evidence to support the idea of a rogue star causing such a catastrophic event. They argue that while climate change is a real and pressing issue, the scenario described on the forum is far-fetched and unlikely. In the end, everyone has to decide for themselves what they believe. Maybe it's all just a bunch of nonsense and life will go on as usual. Or maybe there's a tiny chance that something big is coming. Either way, it's up to each person to figure out what they think and how they want to prepare, if at all. For me, I'm trying not to let it take over my life. I still check the forum sometimes, but I'm also focusing on what I can do now, just in case. I've started paying more attention to emergency preparedness, stocking up on non-perishable food, learning some basic survival skills, and thinking about how to stay warm if the power goes out. I've also been talking to friends and family about being prepared for emergencies, though I haven't mentioned the Wanderer specifically. It's probably better not to spread panic over something that might not even happen, but having a plan for any kind of disaster feels like a good idea, regardless of whether this theory is true or not. At the end of the day, it's important to stay informed, but also to stay grounded. There are a lot of wild theories out there, and it's easy to get caught up in the fear. But life goes on, and we have to make the best of what we know for sure. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole thing. Stay safe and stay prepared. Hey everyone, I just had to share this because it's been keeping me up at night. So I'm one of those people who stay up really late, just browsing the internet and going down all sorts of rabbit holes. A few nights ago I stumbled upon something that seriously freaked me out, and I can't stop thinking about it. I was on Reddit scrolling through a subreddit about government secrets and conspiracies. Most of the stuff there is pretty wild, but one post caught my eye. The title was something like, "The Yellowstone Supervolcano, the government's best-kept secret." I'd heard about the Yellowstone supervolcano before, but I always thought it was just one of those things you don't really need to worry about. Boy, was I wrong. The post was written by someone with the username Volcanic Whisper. They claimed that the supervolcano under Yellowstone National Park is way more dangerous than we've been told. They said that recent earthquakes and other signs show that it could erupt soon, and if it does, it could destroy a huge part of the United States. They had all these links to data and reports that I'd never seen in any news stories. People in the comments were sharing links to dark websites with even more information. I knew the dark web was a sketchy place, but I was curious. So I downloaded a Tor browser and started exploring. It felt like I was entering some secret, forbidden world. After a while, I found a site called The Veil Lifter. It looked like it was made in the early 2000s, very basic and old school, but it had tons of conspiracy theories. There was a whole section on the Yellowstone supervolcano. The articles there were super detailed and really scary. They said the government has been monitoring Yellowstone for years and knows that an eruption is going to happen soon. But instead of telling us, they're hiding it to prevent mass panic. One article was from someone who said they used to work as a geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS. They had these charts and graphs showing how the ground around Yellowstone has been swelling up a lot more than usual and releasing way more gas. It all looked really official and convincing. The geologist wrote that the government is secretly preparing for a disaster, building bunkers and stockpiling supplies for the rich and powerful, while leaving the rest of us in the dark. I felt this chill run down my spine. What if this is true? What if the government is hiding this huge danger from us? The more I read, the more everything seemed to make sense. There were stories about strange military activities near Yellowstone, quiet evacuations of nearby towns, and even mysterious deaths of people who tried to talk about this. I knew I had to share what I found, but I was scared. If the government really is hiding this, they might do anything to keep it a secret. I didn't want to end up like those people who supposedly got silenced. But at the same time, I felt like people needed to know, so I decided to start writing down everything I found and post it online anonymously. It's risky, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. I've been staying up late every night, gathering more information and trying to piece it all together. The more I dig, the more scared I get. What if this isn't just a crazy conspiracy theory? What if it's all true and the end is closer than we think? That night, after reading all those articles, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the ground under Yellowstone, wondering if it was going to explode any day now. It's all I can think about, and I feel like I need to tell as many people as possible before it's too late. Okay, so after all that deep dive into the dark web stuff about Yellowstone, I couldn't stop thinking about how bad things would get if that supervolcano actually erupted. It's not just the explosion itself that's scary, it's everything that would happen afterward. First off, if Yellowstone erupts, it would send a massive amount of ash into the sky. This ash would block out the sun, causing what they call a volcanic winter. Basically, it would get super cold and dark for weeks or even months. This would mess up our weather big time. Crops would fail because they need sunlight, and temperatures would drop a lot. This could lead to food shortages everywhere, and people would start to panic. The eruption itself would be catastrophic. The blast zone is huge, and millions of people live in areas that would be directly affected. Cities like Denver and Salt Lake City could be wiped out or covered in thick layers of ash. The ash would spread across the entire United States, affecting even places far away from Yellowstone. Breathing in volcanic ash is really dangerous. It's not like the ash from a campfire. It's tiny particles of rock and glass that can seriously mess up your lungs. If you breathe it in, it can cause major respiratory problems. Plus, the weight of the ash could collapse buildings, damage vehicles, and cause all kinds of destruction. I found some reports that estimate the death toll if this happens. The numbers are terrifying. Tens of millions of people could die from the initial eruption and the ash. But the long-term effects are even worse. The ash would cool down the planet, causing a mini ice age. This would screw up weather patterns and farming for years, making it hard for people to get food and water. Climate change is already a huge problem, and something like this would make it a million times worse. We're trying to deal with global warming, but a volcanic winter would throw everything off balance. It could push the Earth into a state that we're totally unprepared for. The combination of freezing temperatures and climate change would be a nightmare. It would mess up ecosystems, kill plants and animals, and disrupt our food supply. I also read personal stories from people living near Yellowstone. Some of them are really worried, but others don't seem to know much about the danger. It's like they're living on a ticking time bomb and have no idea. I feel this strong urge to warn them, but I'm just one person. What can I do? I get that the government might have reasons for keeping this a secret, but it doesn't feel right. People need to know what's coming so they can try to prepare. The more I read, the more I'm convinced that something big is going to happen. The signs are all there if you know where to look. Thinking about all this makes me realize how fragile our world is. We worry about everyday stuff like work, bills, and social media. But something like this could change everything in an instant. It's a really scary thought, and it's hard to ignore once you start thinking about it. Alright, so after all the stuff I read about Yellowstone, things only got scarier. If this supervolcano erupts, it's not just going to mess up the US. This could affect the whole world. We're talking about a global nuclear winter and maybe even mass extinction. Here's the deal. When Yellowstone erupts, it would shoot a ton of ash and gases into the atmosphere. This stuff would spread around the world and block sunlight, making everything colder. This isn't just a short-term thing. It could last for years. Crops would fail, temperatures would drop, and everything would get really bad, really fast. Now think about the current world situation. We've got all these countries with nuclear weapons. If things get chaotic because of food shortages, economic crashes, and weird weather, the chances of nuclear war go up. People get desperate and start making bad decisions. Some experts say even a small nuclear war could make the cooling effect even worse, leading to a nuclear winter. A nuclear winter is even more horrible than a volcanic winter. The smoke from burning cities and forests would block the sun even more effectively than volcanic ash. This would cause temperatures to drop drastically. Farming would become almost impossible. No crops mean no food, and billions of people could starve. The environment would take a massive hit. Many animals and plants wouldn't survive the extreme conditions, leading to mass extinctions. The ecosystems we rely on would collapse, and it could take centuries for the planet to bounce back. I read about past mass extinctions, like the one that killed the dinosaurs. Scientists think it was caused by a mix of volcanic activity and a meteor impact that changed the climate drastically. What we're facing with Yellowstone could be similar. It's like we're heading down the same path, but this time it's us who are at risk. This whole thing is so overwhelming. It's hard to believe how quickly things could go south. The more I learn, the more it feels like we're standing on a thin line and one big event could push us into chaos. I get that this sounds really alarmist, but the evidence is out there. Governments around the world need to take this seriously and work together to get ready for something like this. Hiding the truth isn't helping anyone. We need to do everything we can to reduce the risks and protect as many people as possible. As I keep looking for more information, I'm trying to figure out how to share it with others. People need to know what could happen and start preparing. It's a tough balance between spreading awareness and causing panic, but knowing is better than being caught off guard. If you're reading this and thinking, "This doesn't concern me," you're wrong. The Yellowstone supervolcano situation is a huge deal for everyone, no matter where you live. It's not just a problem for people in the US. It's a global issue that could change life for everyone on the planet. Here's why. When Yellowstone erupts, all that ash and gas will go up into the atmosphere and spread everywhere. It's not a local problem, it affects the whole world. The ash would block out the sun and cool the planet. This would mess up the weather all over the globe. Countries everywhere would face food shortages because crops need sunlight to grow. So, even if you live far from Yellowstone, you'd still feel the effects. The temperature drop would be a huge problem too. Winters would get much colder, and summers wouldn't be warm enough to grow food. This would cause a global food crisis. People everywhere would have a hard time finding enough to eat. When there's no food, things can get really bad, leading to conflicts and even wars over resources. If you think your country is safe because it's far from Yellowstone, think again. The world is connected. When one part of the world suffers, everyone else feels it. Trade would slow down or even stop, causing economic problems everywhere. Jobs would be lost, and prices for basic stuff would go up. The environmental damage would be huge too. Many animals and plants wouldn't survive the big changes in climate. This would mess up ecosystems that we all depend on, no matter where we live. Losing so many species would mess up the food chain and make our environment unstable. I know it's easy to think of this as just another doomsday story that probably won't happen. But the risk is real. Scientists have been watching Yellowstone for years, and the signs are there. It could happen in our lifetime, and we need to be ready. This isn't just about the people living near Yellowstone, it's about all of us. We need to take this seriously and push for better preparation and awareness. Governments and leaders need to work together to make plans for what to do if this happens. We also need to spread the word and make sure everyone knows about the potential danger. The more people know, the better we can prepare. Stock up on essentials, learn what to do in a disaster, and stay informed. It might sound like overkill, but it's better to be safe than sorry. This is about the future of our planet and everyone living on it. If we ignore the problem, we're setting ourselves up for disaster. Alright, so here's the bottom line. Everything I've talked about is based on stuff I found online, and a lot of it is from conspiracy theories. None of this is for sure. The idea that the government is hiding the truth about Yellowstone is just a theory. There's no solid proof, and a lot of what I read could be exaggerated or totally made up. I'm not saying you should panic or believe everything I've said. What I'm saying is that it's worth looking into. Do your own research. There's a lot of information out there, and it's important to check multiple sources. Some scientists say the supervolcano isn't as dangerous as these theories make it sound, and that we have more time than we think. You have to decide for yourself what you believe. Maybe the risk isn't as high as some people claim, or maybe it is something we should be more prepared for. Either way, the best thing you can do is stay informed. Read up on it, check out what experts are saying, and make up your own mind. In the end, we all have to decide for ourselves what we think is right and true. Don't just take my word for it. Look into it, think about it, and make a decision based on what you find. Whether you believe the supervolcano is a real threat or just another wild conspiracy theory, Being informed is always a good thing.